Okay, so for my topic of research, I decided to look at white hip hop artists and why a lot of them have not been accepted and embraced by the hip hop community. So, the biggest thing to start off with and always remember about this subject is that hip hop originated in the black community. So, as with all genres of music, there's always a lot of passion behind this origin and the people that were involved with it. So, from the research I've done on the subject, I gather that what has created this clash between these white hip hop artists and the hip hop community is the ideals and the outlook of hip hop. The black community used hip hop to get out of their struggle, get out of their poverty, and make a living and make something of themselves, as well as express themselves. So, where to expand from there as to how these white rappers have been questioned is a lot of them have been questioned by those that came before them, these originators, and those from the 90s, um, and especially African American artists that grew up with nothing, with hardly anything, had to struggle for money, and made it and were successful in life because of their music. They were able to have fun with it and make money off it and make a living doing it. So hip hop greats from past decades observed contemporary artists not acknowledging this history of hip hop. And so like any genre, hip hop has heavy roots that have helped build it up to what it is today. And so examples of this. There's a guy out there named Lil Xan. He is a white artist that in a couple of interviews has said Tupac Shakur, who is a famous 90s rapper who's now deceased, was also known as an activist, one of the greatest lyricists of our time. Lil Xan actually says in a couple of interviews that this guy is boring. So obviously that's going to do no good for him trying to get embraced in the hip hop community and the black community, essentially. So that is one of the biggest ones that I thought of off the bat. Another one is I believe it was Lil Pump who said he was the best rapper alive and he was also the best lyrical rapper. So he, like Lil Xan, is already choosing to hop over these greats like Tupac, like Biggie Smalls, who those two guys alone are known as basically the two greatest rappers ever. So aside from that, you go down the list. You have Nas, you have Eminem, Dr. Dre, Ice Cube. Those names alone, Kendrick Lamar to name a contemporary artist, um, are amazing lyrical rappers. And so Lil Pump making radio hits that are much simpler lyrically than those guys, and for to him to not acknowledge that is simply just the hip hop community. All those guys are seeing that as a big slap in the face. Now, next example. I need to find the name of this person, but I also do remember a white hip hop artist that said they had never listened to Biggie Smalls or Tupac. I found his name. Lil Yachty in 2016 said publicly that he does not know five of Biggie Smalls or Tupac's songs. Tupac Shakur is one of the best rappers of all time, and he was born and raised in Queens, New York, moved to Oakland, California at the age of 17 with his sister. At the time, his mother actually remained in New York for a few reasons, more than likely. One of them can be speculated is her struggle with drug addiction at the time. And his mother was also an active member of the Black Panther Party, mostly before the birth of her son, Tupac Shakur. And this attitude definitely rubbed off on Tupac and can be heard throughout his lyrics in his songs. Tupac spoke passionately of his desire for equality, and he never missed an opportunity to point out mistreatment of people of color. So it's this kind of picture that the black community has appreciated being painted in hip hop music. The average white person, you might catch them thinking that, rap could just be considered a hobby. So that's where the clash comes from. mainly. So to be a part of hip hop, you need to know who these two people are, for one, and you need to know some of their music. And if you don't remember, maybe a whole lot of the lyrics or like the music overall, you at least need to know what their music stood for. So that again, big slap in the face to the hip hop community. Now, last example I have for this point is Russ, also a white rapper. He's gained quite a bit of a following, but only to a certain extent. I'm about to expand on that. So he is an example of an artist that's shown some restraint and resentment towards hip hop in his music, as in some of the picky responses to his music. And a lot of those responses have probably come from more so the black community and people of color. And Russ is not the first white artist to have this happen to him as far as his music. A lot of these white hip hop artists have actually gained following and started making their millions off of having dominantly white followings. 86.88% of the people who follow him are aged 20 and under. So that tells us that what's left out of that percentage, the vast part of that following, is people like my age, like I'm 27. So people, 25 and older that grew up around this 90s hip hop and that flavor and that origination and heavy growth of the genre coming up from that struggle. So 86.8% of these people that follow Russ were not even alive when any of that was happening, and therefore have to be told and taught about it like it's history class. So not that they can't learn and understand and respect that, but it's automatically on a different level of perspective. Now, going through the statistics with Russ, 50.9% of them are white, 25.9% are Hispanic, and only 22.5% are black. Again, that one's pretty self-explanatory there. The audience is heavily concentrated in states such as Ohio, Washington, Arizona, Oregon, and Nevada. Now, those 5 states, they're pretty dominantly white. Now, regardless of what those numbers actually are, the states that he's missing a lot of are what? California, so you're missing LA, you're missing New York, you're missing Atlanta, and you're missing Chicago. So, not that you can't still have a following without having the support of those 4 prominent hip hop spots, but if you don't have the love and support of those spots, then that is directly feeding into my point of him not being heavily embraced by the hip hop community. Okay, moving forth. Next point. A lot of these white hip hop artist material is seen as corny or non authentic. So, to formulate this thought a little bit, the elements of hip hop involve being smooth and authentic and being slick with your words. And so, for corny approaches of lyrics, it's not entirely accepted. An example of this is G-Eazy, who is an artist from San Francisco. He's a white hip hop artist that has had some large commercial success through being signed to his major record label, RCA Records. And so he's a pretty slick rapper. He has got some smooth rhymes, and he's got a pretty smooth sounding voice. However, when I listened to a video on YouTube from Blackie Speaks, I was introduced to this song of his called Say So. And at the end of this song, his voice tone sounds very corny. It sounds like he's like sick at 3 a.m. and still trying to get inebriated and somehow talk to a woman, is basically what it sounds like. And while there's plenty of rappers out there that have talked about that same kind of thing in their songs, you would never really catch any rapper, especially not an African American rapper, presenting it in the kind of fashion that G-Eazy does in Say So. So if you listen to that song, at the end of it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And for contrast of this, if you want authentic sounding lyrics, go listen to almost any song by Biggie Smalls or any song by Tupac, and you'll feel that passion and that that heartfelt vibe behind the tonality and the lyrics. Now, to contrast that with some good, authentic hip hop lyrics, I'll pull an example from Sky's the Limit by Notorious B.I.G., aka Biggie Smalls. So there's a stanza in his third verse that goes, "And if the game shakes me or breaks me, I hope it makes me a better man. Take a better stand, put money in my mom's hand, and get my daughter that college fund so she don't need no man." So that right there, it really hits you in the heart. It really hits you in the soul, as to how Biggie's feeling when he was rapping that. And no matter what happens to me in life, I hope that I'm better for it. That I come out of it having learned something. Coming back to an example I talked about before, his name is Lil Pump. Him and 6ix9ine are examples of artists that have extremely different sounds and tones from their vocals. That somewhat embody an EDM sound. They sound very electronic, they're very auto-tuned, and they're on very trappy beats, so it's all a very electronic composition. And while those people still recorded their voices were not. They don't sound super authentic. They don't sound like it's just their voice talent alone. They're definitely um, engineered and transformed into something new in the final product. So this, along with their colorful image, their hair and the bracelets and beads they wear, some of their teeth are like rainbow colors. This has created an entire sub-following of hip-hop fans that are into this kind of sound that they produce. And this kind of image and the kind of sound is again something that's not totally embraced by the hip-hop community, because it's not acknowledging the roots and elements of the origins of hip hop, and also going back to Lil Pump, who is one of the guys I'm talking about, is the guy that trying to skip over all these lyrical rappers and saying that he's the best. So that's the same guy. Last point to talk about is that whites have shown what can be considered disrespect towards hip hop by showcasing it as an easy, universal skill or hobby that almost anyone could master. So, what do I mean by this? You've probably seen a few examples of this, just scrolling through Facebook, being bored at work or being on your lunch break. You've probably seen a few videos of people just rapping, like rapping for fun. Not that there's an issue with that, but their content, it might be just like washing the dishes or like, changing their kid's diaper. So, and that more significantly, just the content of it and the approach of it is something that that the hip hop community doesn't like. And that's it's showing it as it's deforming it as a form of art, and kind of just putting it into a raw content that I speak for the hip hop community when I say I don't appreciate it in that format. So this is something that hip hop will never appreciate, because hip hop came out of the ground through these people and their struggle with equality and trying to make something of themselves when they didn't have the same opportunities available to them as whites, so they had to go get it a different way, like slinging drugs or doing other illegal things. But eventually, for some of them, this thing called hip hop came along, and they figured out that they could make music and play gigs and do recordings and make hit records. So that is why the hip hop community will never appreciate this, this playful approach to it on social media. So to recap what I've talked about, white hip hop artists have not been heavily embraced and accepted by the hip hop community because of their lack of acknowledgement for those who came before them and the history of hip hop. and their questionable and what can be considered non-authentic lyrical and vocal approach, and also the tendency of people of their same color to spout off hip hop as just a hobby and something that anybody can do. So that last part is what has really misconstrued this image of hip hop and where it came from, and that is, like as I've mentioned a few times throughout this video, is from the gutter, from that stage of poverty that these African Americans had to rise up from in their struggle for equality and for civil rights for their people.